Hi, Happy New Year. It's a new year, so it's time to make a new video. And we're talking about the Mahabharata. So thanks for joining us. Now, in our last talk, we tried to give an overview of meaning in the Mahabharata. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about Vyasa. Now, we're working on a retelling of the Mahabharata in story form with images provided by a Ukrainian artist. His name is Igor Baranko. And this is under the guidance of His Holiness Bhakti Bimal Avadut Maharaj and with the help of a lot of other people. But I've been asked to help with the story, and I thought it would be good to give a little background before we go much further. And our story begins with Vyasa walking the battlefield, and he has a conversation with Bhishma Dev. So it's after the battle of Kurukshetra, and we see Vyasa, the storyteller, walking through the ruins, and he finds the bodies of soldiers, horses, elephants. He sees the smoke from the fires of the dead fill the air, and weird bomb craters smoldering with the embers of strange weapons. The stench is unearthly, and Kali Yuga has begun. So, as we see the figure of Vyasa walking across the battlefield, we ask ourselves, well, who is Vyasa? Now, Vyasa is the patriarch of the Kuru family after Shantanu. Bhishma Dev rules as the regent, but it's really Vyasa who continues the line, because the sons of Shantanu have no children. And Vyasa's children are Pandu, Dhritarashtra, and Vidura, whose sons will be the Kurus and Pandavas. And since the war of Kurukshetra is about the succession for the throne of Hastinapur, Vyasa is really a key figure at the core of the Mahabharata story. And there's a lot of speculation about the personality of the original poet of the Mahabharata that has grown up around the name Vyasa. But before we get into that, I thought I'd tell a little bit about the backstory of Vyasadeva. So, Vyasadeva continues the line of King Shantanu. And Shantanu, you remember, is the father of Bhishma Dev. Shantanu falls in love with Ganges. And he's horrified when he sees Ganges drowning her children in the river Ganges. It turns out that her children are really gods, known as the Vasus. There were 8 Vasus. And they were cursed to take birth as mortals because they'd committed some offense to the sage Vashishta. Vashishta had a magic cow called a Kamadhenu, and the 8 Vasus played a trick on him, stealing his cow. So they were cursed to take birth as mortals, but they didn't have to live on earth for very long, because Ganges was going to save them, effectively drowning these children, return their souls to the heavenly planets immediately. So apparently she's committing a great crime by drowning her children, but the backstory is she's helping the Vasus take care of their karma. Anyways, Shantanu is horrified seeing her drowning her children in the Ganges, and he stops her. And he'd promised her that he would never question her actions. And so with this, she tells him, you broke your promise to me, and I'm going to leave you now. And she takes her 8th child with her, and this is Bhishma. And Bhishma will return many years later after having been trained in the martial science by Parashuram, the warrior Brahmin. And also, ironically, in the Vedas by Vashishta, whose cow originates the drama here. In the meantime, Shantanu meets Satyavati and falls in love. So, Satyavati is the mother of Vyasa. Later, when Shantanu wants to marry Satyavati, Satyavati's father, the fisher king, I believe his name is Das Maharaj, demands of Shantanu that his son Bhishma not only abdicate the throne that he's about to inherit, but he's also supposed to give up any claim to the throne for his children. And Bhishma obviates this by taking a terrible vow. And his vow is that he will never marry or have any children. So Satyavati becomes the queen, and her children, Vichitravirya and Chitrangada, become the heirs. Well, Chitrangada fights a duel with a Gandharva and dies, leaving only Vichitravirya. And even after Bhishma goes to the Swayambara ceremony of the king of Kashi, his daughters, the three princesses, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika, and steals the three princesses. Even after he does this, Vichitravirya is unable to have any children for some reason. It's never really explained. Vichitravirya dies. Bhishma refuses to have any children. So it falls to Vyasa to continue the line of the Kurus, to continue the legacy of Shantanu. So, how is it that Vyasa came into this world? Well, the story goes that as a young girl, Satyavati used to ferry people across the river Jamuna on behalf of her father, the fisher king. She was known as Matsya Gandha, which means she had the fragrance, or gandha, of a fish. So it was a fishy smell. And she meets a great sage, Parashara Muni. One day she's ferrying passengers across the Jamuna River. And Parashara Muni has just descended from a long pilgrimage in the Himalayas. So he hasn't seen a woman in a long time. He's also very repulsive and old, but he has a mystic power. So he seduces Satyavati, and Satyavati tells him, well, I don't really want to do anything with you because, first of all, you're an old man and you're disgusting. So he changes his form into that of a handsome young man. And then she makes another condition. She says, well, I don't want to lose my virginity. And Parashara Muni assures her that whatever they do, her virginity will be restored. And then she says, well, if you have a mystic power, then I want you to take away this foul smell, this foul fishy smell that I have as the daughter of a fisherwoman. And Parashuram blesses her that she will have the perfume of 1,000 lotuses, so that on either side of the river people will be able to tell that she's coming just from the sweet fragrance of her perfume. And she likes this idea, but she says, well, people will see us. So by his mystic power, he creates a special sort of a mist that descends around the boat, and no one can see anything. Finally, the saint Parashara, not related with Parashuram, and Satyavati, they get together and they do everything necessary to have children. And immediately Vyasa is born, and they leave him on an island. So his name becomes Dvaipayana, because the word dweep means island, just like Nabadweep, Shetadweep. There's many references to dweepas, Jambudweep. The word dweep means island. So Dvaipayana means island born. And he's called Krishna because he has a dark complexion. So Krishna Dvaipayana, and Vyas, because the word Vyas means to divide and to compile. These are the two duties of an editor. An editor takes a work and reduces it, and then removes all the things which are non-essential, and compiles that work together with other works to make a new work. So Vyasa is considered to be responsible for the original division of the Vedas. Originally the Vedas were one, and Vyasa divided them into four. The one Veda flows from the syllable Om, which is elaborated in the form of the Gayatri Mantra. And the four Vedas flow from the Gayatri Mantra. There's the Rig, Atharva, Yajur, and Sama Vedas. Vyasa is also the author of the Upanishads, which elaborate on the meaning of the four Vedas, which are mostly involved with ritual and sacrifice. And then the Mahabharata is given in story form, so that people can realize in the form of stories the meaning of the original Vedas. So Vyasa is very important in the story of the Mahabharata, because later on he becomes the patriarch of the Kurus. And he does this in secret because his mother Satyavati, years later, realizes that her sons will not rule. So she needs to revive the line. And by mystic power, she calls on Vyasa, and Vyasa appears. He says, "How can I help you, my mother?" And she says, "Well, I need you to continue the line, please." And he understands this is going to be difficult for the two princesses, Ambalika and Ambika, because Vyasa is a sage, a hermit. He lives in the Himalayas. He has a leathery skin, long fingernails. He's dirty. He wears a deer skin. His hair is matted on his head. He's not at all handsome or good looking. And what happens is he goes to the first princess, Ambika, and she agrees to meet him in the dead of night, but with all the lights turned off. And so they have sex, but because her eyes are closed, her child is born blind, as the blind king Dhritarashtra. And so a second attempt is made with the second princess, Ambika. And she realizes she has to keep her eyes open because she doesn't want to have a blind son. But she turns completely pale with fear in the moment of conceiving a child with this leathery, strange hermit, Vyasa. And so her son is born very pale, and his name is Pandu, which means the pale. So you have the blind Dhritarashtra and Pandu the pale. And later it was decided to try again, but this time the princesses were wise to Vyasa's appearance, and they substituted a serving girl. And the serving girl was not shy with the sage Vyasa, and he rewarded her by giving her a child who would be the very emblem of Dharma, and his name was Vidura. And Vidura is taken to be an incarnation of Dharma. Sometimes Dharma and Yamaraj, the king of death, are equated. So Vidura always gives very wise and objective counsel, but his counsel is vitiated by the fact that he's not truly in the royal line, but the son of a serving girl. So, in spite of his opinions, a rivalry begins between Pandu, who's the king, and Dhritarashtra, the blind older brother who really wants to be king, where later Dhritarashtra's sons, headed by Duryodhana, consider themselves to be the heirs to the royal throne, and the sons of Pandu, headed by Yudhishthira, including Arjuna, Bhima, Nakula, and Sakhadev, are the competition, and they become known as the Pandavas. So the story of the Mahabharata is the history of the competition between the Kurus, the sons of Dhritarashtra, and the Pandavas. Technically speaking, they're all Kurus because they all come in the line of an ancient descendant, an ancient ancestor who was Kuru. Vyasa, I believe, and Bhishma are supposed to be ninth in line from Kuru, or there have been 9 generations since the time of Kuru. Anyways, Vyasa's children then are Pandu, Dhritarashtra, and Vidura, whose sons are the Kurus and Pandavas, and the war over the succession for the throne of Hastinapur, the city of the elephants, is the core of the Mahabharata story. Now, there's a lot of speculation about who Vyasa really was. Okay, so we have the core story of his unusual and mystical birth as the son of the sage Parashara. But who exactly Vyasa was is another difficult thing to pin down, because one of the problems we have is that he's supposed to be responsible for the creation of the original Vedas, and then again he's supposed to be responsible for the Vedanta Sutra and the Upanishads, and then again he was credited as being the author of the Mahabharata, and later of the Bhagavatam itself. So sometimes it's said that these different scriptures, they flow out of different time periods, but they contain eternal truth. So the author is one. Since the truth is one and the truth is revealed, the author of these books is the same divine personality. Vyasa, in a sense, is an avatar. He's an incarnation of God for the purpose of writing the scriptures. So, while there's a lot of speculation about his personality, tradition in India venerates him as an immortal, inspired sage and the unique author of many different scriptures. Modern criticism of Mahabharata believes that the word Vyas may be something like a title. It means something like writer or scribe or editor. So this could be a title that was given different gifted and inspired poets and scribes, just as a lot of criticism believes that there might have been more than one Homer, or there might have been more than one Shakespeare. So in the same way, there might have been more than one Vyasa. And since the Mahabharata seems to have gone through a number of different editions before reaching its final form, it's felt that over the course of the book's evolution, there must have been more than one scribe or poet that adopted the name Vyasa. After all, Vyasa is supposed to be the father of Dhritarashtra and Pandu. And Pandu and Dhritarashtra are quite old when the Battle of Kurukshetra takes place. Then again, the story of the Battle of Kurukshetra is supposed to have been written down as the Mahabharata and taught by Vyasa to his son, Vaishampayana, and to his disciple, Sutta Goswami. So later, Vaishampayana will dictate the Mahabharata at the snake sacrifice of King Janamejaya. Janamejaya is the son of Parikshit, and Parikshit is the son of Abhimanyu, the grandson of Arjuna. So if you think about generations, there's Pandu, Arjuna, Abhimanyu, Parikshit, and Janamejaya, 5 different generations before Vaishampayana recites the Mahabharata at the snake sacrifice. Then again, that particular version of Mahabharata is heard by Soti or Sutta Goswami. And sometime later, Sutta Goswami finds himself in the forest of Naimisharanya, where Shonaka Rishi, the president of the ashram of 10,000 sages gathered there, asks Sutta Goswami, "What did you hear at the snake sacrifice of King Janamejaya?" And Sutta Goswami repeats that. So then there's a 6th generation. And so if we take it that a later Vyasa, or the same Vyasa, later writes down Sutta Goswami's version of what he heard from Vaishampayana that was taught to him by Vyasa after the Battle of Kurukshetra, it seems very difficult to hold that all this was the work of only one individual. On the other hand, since Vyasa is considered to be an avatar of God, nothing is impossible. It's also been said that many of these accounts come from different yugas. They come from different time cycles. And so the Battle of Kurukshetra that was fought thousands and thousands of years ago on another planet was recounted and finally put down by Vyasa here. So there's all this mystery behind this particular individual Vyasa. So in our retelling of the Mahabharata, we've drawn him as a mysterious, prophetic individual. And yet he captures the soul of India. That's the fascinating thing about Vyasadeva. Whoever he may have been or might be, he captures the soul of India so well and reveals inner wisdom so perfectly that it's hard to differ with these traditional accounts, since his vision is so much in line with the vision of India. The soul of Vyasa and the soul of India are practically one. And so it is that Vyasa himself, whoever he might have been, is the most profound writer of the Indian soul. And not only the Indian soul, but the universal soul. The issues that concern Vyasa have to do with the self, the eternal self, the individual self, and the supreme self. But leaving aside the philosophical depths of his work, another interesting point that we see in the Mahabharata is his style. I have different versions of the Mahabharata. This was given me by Prapana Krishna Prabhu, who is now Tirtha Maharaj, I think. This is the Ganguly translation, my personal favorite. Ganguly was the only person in history to have translated the complete Mahabharata in its entirety. Even modern versions like the recent Vivek de Broglie translations leave out entire sections of the work because they feel, well, these may have been modern interpolations. And so de Broglie relies on the so-called critical edition. And we'll talk about the critical edition later. But modern criticism tries to avoid much of the supernatural elements in the Mahabharata and does so by excising entire sections. So, because they feel, well, Krishna cannot possibly be God, so this supernatural explanation for the stripping of Draupadi can't be real, and they take that part of the story out. And then they also take out Draupadi's prayers to Krishna, figuring, well, this is another interpolation. And this way they strip down the Mahabharata and try to discover, well, what is the epic poem at its heart? But the Ganguly translation contains the entire Mahabharata in 12 volumes. I also have, here's another version. This is a Bengali translation. As you can see, all these different versions are very big. The Mahabharata runs to about 2.5 million words in translation, and it's somewhere between 75,000 and 100,000 shlokas, depending on the version that's accepted. But throughout all these different versions, what's fascinating is that Vyasa has a particular style. And his style may include certain supernatural elements from time to time, but in fact, it's quite realistic and a very detailed description of the intimate details of daily life in ancient India. So, what we call mythology, and I use the term very advisedly, may be taken for granted in this work. In other words, the idea that the gods can intervene, that gods exist, and that there is a supreme God. This is something that's taken for granted, and it's a very important aspect of the book that you can't really strip out. You can't remove Krishna from the Mahabharata and still have the Mahabharata. It turns into a different work. So the mythology may seem strange, and the history of ancient kings may seem fantastic at times, but again, the intimate details of daily life in ancient India are so carefully documented that this has a tendency to imbue the work with a kind of magical realism. The realistic aspects of the work, in other words, are so well tied down that the supernatural and miraculous aspects seem to sort of fall in place. As the Pandavas wander through the Khandava forest, for example, or the Dandakaranya forest, the different forests that they wander through, every species of tree and plant and flower is very, very carefully documented there. The physical description of life thousands of years ago is really filled with detail. And so, given that the realistic detail is so carefully put, one cannot help but feel an intense realism in the prose of Vyasa. Vyasa is often criticized for not being sufficiently poetic. It's hard to pin down exactly the date of the Mahabharata, but for example, the poet Kalidas was writing in the 5th or 6th century, and he has a version of Shakuntala, which is a story in the Mahabharata. So we know that it's of great antiquity. The commentaries given by Sridhar Swami on the Bhagavad Gita are dating from around the time of Shankaracharya, maybe a little after. So we know that the Mahabharata is a very ancient literature, even though the history itself of the book is in dispute, and the date of the Kurukshetra battle varies by hundreds of years. Examining the true history then of the Mahabharata is a very elusive goal. It's very hard to tie down exactly when the Battle of Kurukshetra took place or when the Mahabharata was written. But these things are not considered to be of great importance by those who love and know this book. It's kind of taken for granted that it must be something like 3,000 to 5,000 years old. So this makes the biography of Vyasa himself even more elusive. So to try to understand the character of the author of the Mahabharata in the light of scholarship and modern criticism, it's a very difficult task. It would be, as Vyasa himself puts it, like trying to catch the rainbow with your fingers. So distancing Vyasa as a character, we can understand him as the author of the Mahabharata, much more than being a mere character in the story or the patriarch of the Kurus and Pandavas. Vyasa himself is the author of the Mahabharata and arguably the greatest storyteller ever.